She stood alone in the candle-lit bedchamber, still wearing her ivory wedding gown, and the echo of her husband's footsteps faded down the corridor. He had not looked at her, not once. The words he'd spoken moments before hung in the air like frost. "You are a necessity, not a wife. Do not expect affection where none exists." Rosalind Fairchild, now Duchess of Ashbourne, did not allow herself to weep until the heavy door clicked shut behind him. Then she sank onto the edge of the vast bed, her fingers gripping the cold silk coverlet, and let the tears fall in silence. She had known this marriage was not born of tenderness. She had known Julian Devereux, the Duke of Ashbourne, had agreed to the union only to settle a debt her father could not repay. But she had not known how much he would despise her for it. She had not known that his hatred ran deeper than obligation. Outside the frosted window, the wind whispered across the Ashbourne estate. Somewhere in the house, servants were clearing the remnants of the wedding breakfast, and guests had long since departed. She was utterly alone. Slowly, she unpinned her veil, removed the pearl combs from her dark hair, and let the heavy curls tumble down her back. Every movement felt hollow. She was a duchess now, yet she had never felt less worthy in her life. A week passed, then two. Julian was rarely seen outside his study or the far wing of the sprawling manor. They took meals separately. The staff treated her with polite curiosity, but the silence of the house was crushing. Rose tried to fill the emptiness. She learned the names of the maids, the butler, the housekeeper, Mrs. Bell. She walked the gardens until the hem of her mourning dress grew damp with dew. She wrote letters to her younger sister back in London, letters that painted a far kinder portrait of her new life than she was living. One afternoon, she gathered her courage and knocked on the door of his study. The sound of her own heartbeat nearly deafened her. The door opened, and there he stood. Tall, broad-shouldered, his dark hair slightly disheveled, eyes the color of storm clouds. He looked at her not with anger, but with the kind of cold indifference that was somehow worse. "Your Grace," she said softly, "I wondered if we might take tea together." His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "I have work, forgive me." The door closed again, gently but firmly. Rose stood there for several long seconds, staring at the carved wood before she turned and walked away. That was the moment she began to understand that hope was a fragile, dangerous thing. Time crawled forward. The first true crack in her isolation came not from the Duke, but from the estate itself. While wandering the grounds, she came upon a cluster of tenant cottages. One door stood open, and inside, a woman was struggling to tend to a sick child while a baby cried in a cradle. Rose hesitated only a moment before stepping over the threshold. She rolled up her sleeves, sent for the physician out of her own small allowance, and spent the afternoon holding the feverish child and soothing the exhausted mother. Word spread. The new Duchess had dirt on her gown and kindness in her hands. Slowly, the tenants began to smile when they saw her. The staff softened. Mrs. Bell began leaving a fresh vase of roses in her sitting room, but Julian remained utterly unaware, or so she thought. One evening she was returning from the cottages, her cloak dusty and her hair escaping its pins when she crossed the great hall. Julian was descending the staircase. He paused, his gaze sweeping over her appearance with a flicker of something, surprise perhaps or disapproval. "You have been occupied," he observed. "I find I cannot be idle, Your Grace," she replied, her voice steady. "It does not suit me." Something shifted behind his eyes, but he only inclined his head and continued on his way. Rose's heart stumbled. She had imagined 100 times what it might feel like to be truly seen by him. Now she realized it would only ever be a glance, never a gaze. Weeks became months. Spring melted into a golden summer. A grand dinner was hosted at Ashbourne Hall to introduce the new Duchess to the county. Rose wore a gown of soft sage silk, her hair dressed with simple pearls. She felt almost beautiful until Lady Cecily Devereux, Julian's widowed cousin who kept residence at the hall, cornered her in the drawing-room beforehand. "You do look quite pretty," Cecily said, her smile sharp as cut glass. One might almost forget the circumstances of your marriage, but of course, nobody here has forgotten what your father did. A merchant's daughter, elevated so suddenly. How fortunate you are that my cousin was willing to forgive such a debt." Rose's cheeks burned, but she did not flinch. "I am grateful every day, Lady Cecily." Cecily's eyes glittered. "Then do try not to embarrass him tonight. He deserves a wife who understands his worth, not one who must be taught it." That evening during the dinner, Cecily turned the conversation with surgical precision. She spoke of pedigree, of bloodlines, of the sacred trust of noble families. Every barb was aimed at Rose, and every guest felt it. Julian, seated at the head of the table, said nothing, not a single word in her defense. Rose kept her expression composed, her voice warm as she directed the conversation toward the charitable projects she had started in the village. But inside, she was shrinking piece by piece. When the last carriage rolled away that night, she walked to the terrace alone. The stars were bright and indifferent. She wrapped her arms around herself and whispered into the dark, "I cannot keep trying. It is breaking me." From that night forward, the Duchess of Ashbourne changed. She stopped seeking her husband's attention. She stopped lingering in the hallway at the hour he passed. She stopped leaving invitations for tea on his desk. She became a quiet, efficient presence, calm, polite, and utterly distant. She poured her energy into the estate, the tenants, a small school she founded for the village children. The light in her eyes softened into something serene, but it no longer kindled when Julian entered a room. The Duke noticed. He noticed the way she no longer looked at him across the dinner table with tentative hope. He noticed the silences that were no longer heavy with unspoken longing, but simply empty. At first, it was a relief. Then it became an irritant. Then it became something he could not name. One late afternoon, he stood by the window of his study and watched her walking back from the stables. She was laughing, actually laughing, as the young head groom said something amusing. A gust of wind caught her hat and she reached up to catch it, her smile wide and genuine. Julian's chest tightened. He had never made her laugh like that. He had never tried. The realization stung more than he cared to admit. A few days later, he attended a local botanical exhibition at the village assembly rooms at the request of a neighbor. He expected to be bored. Instead, he saw his wife. She was standing before a display of pressed wildflowers, deep in conversation with a tall, fair-haired gentleman. The man was speaking animatedly, and Rose was listening with such rapt attention, her cheeks flushed with interest. The gentleman handed her a sprig of lavender, and she held it to her nose, her smile small and private. Julian felt something hot and ugly coil in his stomach. He did not approach. He stood in the shadow of a pillar and watched until the man gallantly kissed her hand in farewell. Later, he learned the man's name from a gossiping matron, Mr. Evan Lockwood, a botanist and scholar, recently returned from abroad, and most infuriatingly, an old childhood friend of the Duchess. That evening, Julian found himself restless. He paced his study, the image of her smile for another man burning behind his eyes. He told himself it was mere pride. The Duchess of Ashbourne should not be seen bestowing such warmth on a stranger. But the feeling was not pride. It was raw, undeniable jealousy. The following day, he deliberately sought her out. He found her in the morning room, writing in a leather-bound journal. She looked up at his entrance, her expression politely blank. "Your Grace, did you require something?" The formality cut him. Once she had called him by his name softly, as if testing the sound. Now she addressed him as if he were a titled stranger. "I saw you at the exhibition yesterday," he said, his tone carefully controlled. "You seemed quite engrossed in your companion." Rose closed her journal slowly. "Mr. Lockwood is a dear friend of many years. We share an interest in botany. It is not appropriate for the Duchess of Ashbourne to be so publicly familiar with an unmarried gentleman." A flicker of something, hurt, perhaps, or anger, crossed her features, but it vanished so quickly he almost missed it. "I am sorry you feel that way," she said evenly. "I will endeavor to be more discreet in my friendships, since my husband has no wish to fill the role of companion himself." The words were not loud. They were not angry, but they landed with the force of a blow. Julian stared at her, momentarily speechless. She rose, curtsied with flawless grace, and left the room. He was left standing in the silence, the echo of her quiet truth ringing in his ears. After that confrontation, the distance between them widened into a chasm. Rose no longer made any pretense of ordinary conversation. She managed the household, attended church, visited her tenants, and disappeared for long afternoons that no one could quite account for. Julian's jealousy curdled into suspicion. He began to notice the small, unexplained absences. The way she sometimes returned to the manor with a tender, faraway look in her eyes. The way Mrs. Bell would occasionally receive a sealed note and say, "From the Duchess, Your Grace," as if that explained everything. His cousin Cecily was quick to pour poison into the wound. "I do hope Rosalind is not wandering too far alone," she remarked one afternoon, her voice dripping with false concern. "It would be dreadful if she were to bring scandal upon this house. You know how people talk, and that Mr. Lockwood is so often in the district these days." Julian's hands clenched. He did not trust Cecily's motives, but the seed of doubt had already been planted long before she spoke. One evening in late autumn he followed her. He kept his distance, his horse's hooves muffled by the carpet of fallen leaves. She walked a little over a mile beyond the estate boundary, to a small, ivy-covered cottage nestled among ancient oaks. The windows glowed with warm light. He watched from the tree line as she knocked, and the door swung open to reveal a little girl, no more than 7 years old, with dark ringlets and bright eyes. The child threw her arms around Rose's neck, crying, "Mama Rose, you came." Julian felt the world tilt beneath him. Mama Rose, the words hammered in his skull. A child. His wife had been hiding a child. His mind raced through a storm of betrayal and fury. Before he could think, he dismounted and strode toward the cottage. He pushed the door open without knocking. Rose whirled around, her face going pale. The little girl clung to her skirt. "What is the meaning of this?" Julian's voice was low, dangerous. "Explain yourself." Rose drew a shaky breath, but she did not look away. She gently urged the child toward an older woman who had been sitting by the hearth, then turned back to him. "I will explain everything, but not here, not in front of Lily. Please, Julian, come outside." The sound of his name on her lips after so many months momentarily disarmed him. He nodded stiffly and stepped back into the cold night air. She followed, closing the door behind her. The silence stretched between them, fragile as glass. "She is not my daughter," Rose began, her voice trembling only slightly. "She is your niece, your sister Charlotte's child." Julian staggered back as if struck. "That is impossible. Charlotte died years ago. There was no child." "There was. Her name is Lily. She was born in secret, and her father abandoned her before she drew breath. Charlotte made the wet nurse promise to keep her hidden to protect her from scandal. When she passed, the nurse kept her word. I found out by accident a few months after our wedding. I discovered letters in the attic, tied with a faded ribbon. Letters Charlotte wrote but never sent." Rose's voice cracked. "I could not let an innocent child grow up hidden, unloved, while I had the means to help. So I have been coming here ever since. I pay for her keep, her education. I read to her. She stopped, a tear slipping down her cheek. "I love her." Julian could not speak. His chest heaved with a storm of emotions, shock, grief, guilt, a terrible, aching tenderness. He thought of his sister, beautiful and doomed, the laughter they had shared as children before a scoundrel had broken her heart. He had blamed the Fairchild family because the man who ruined Charlotte was a business associate of Rose's father. He had let that blame curdle into years of quiet hatred. And all the while this woman, his wife, the wife he had treated as a stranger, had been doing what he should have done. She had been loving his forsaken niece. "Why?" he finally choked out. "Why would you do this for a family that has given you nothing but coldness?" Rose wrapped her arms around herself as if against a bitter wind. "Because I knew," she whispered. "I knew about Charlotte before I even married you. I found the first letter in my father's study, mixed with old papers from a failed investment. I understood why you hated us. I understood why you agreed to the marriage to punish my family, to claim what was left of our honor. But I also understood that you were broken, and that an innocent child was lost in the wreckage. I thought, I thought if I came here, if I could love Lily and maybe, in time, earn your respect, I could heal something. I was foolish. No, Julian said hoarsely, stepping toward her. No, you were not foolish. I was blind, I was cruel. Rosalind, I have been a monster. She shook her head, fresh tears falling. You were grieving, but I cannot be invisible any longer. I cannot pour my heart into a home that will never be mine. A sob tore from his throat. He reached for her hands and she let him take them, her fingers cold and trembling. I do not deserve your forgiveness, he said, his voice raw. But I am begging for it anyway. I love you. I did not know it, I would not let myself know it. But I have loved you for longer than I can bear. I love the way you roll up your sleeves and work beside the tenants. I love the way you refuse to break under Cecily's cruelty. I love the way you gave up on me because it finally woke me from my arrogance. Please, please do not leave me. Please do not leave us. Lily needs you. I need you. Rose looked up at him, her eyes searching his face for any trace of the coldness that had once lived there. She found none. What she saw instead was a man shattered and remade, his heart laid bare under the indifferent stars. Slowly, she lifted one hand and touched his cheek. He closed his eyes at the contact, a shudder running through him. I have loved you since the day you first looked past me, she whispered. But I had to stop hopping. It was destroying me. Can you understand that? I understand, he said, pressing her hand to his lips. And I will spend the rest of my life earning back your hope, every single day. I swear it. In the cottage behind them, the door creaked open. Little Lily peered out, her thumb in her mouth. Is the angry man gone, Mama Rose? Julian turned, and for the first time he really looked at the child. She had his sister's eyes, deep, dark, curious. Something inside him broke open all over again. He knelt down, heedless of the damp earth, and held out a hand. I am not angry anymore, he said gently. I am your uncle. Your mother was my dearest sister, and I would like very much to know you if you will let me. Lily looked at Rose, who nodded with tear-streaked encouragement. The little girl stepped forward and placed her small hand in his. Julian's shoulders shook with a silent sob. Rose knelt beside them, her own tears falling freely now. The three of them stayed there, huddled together in the circle of lantern light spilling from the open door, and the cold night air seemed suddenly full of warmth. In the weeks that followed, Ashbourne Hall transformed. Julian publicly acknowledged Lily as his ward and brought her to live at the manor. A nursery was prepared next to the Duchess's chambers, filled with toys, books, and the sound of laughter. Cecily, faced with the revelation of her own slanders, chose to retire to a distant relative's estate, her sharpness no longer welcome. The staff, who had long adored their gentle Duchess, embraced the new order with quiet joy. Julian courted his wife with a tenderness that surprised everyone, not least himself. He brought her wildflowers from his rides. He read to Lily in the evenings while Rose embroidered by the fire. He asked her opinion on estate matters and listened intently to her answers. And slowly, cautiously, Rose began to let hope bloom again. One evening, as they stood together on the terrace watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of amber and rose, Julian took her hand and raised it to his lips. I was so afraid of losing you, he murmured. I still am. Rose turned to face him, her heart full and steady. You will not lose me, Julian. I am not going anywhere. But I need you to understand, love is not a cage. It is a garden. It must be tended. Then teach me, he said, his voice low and earnest. I am a willing student. She smiled, a real smile, the kind that reached her eyes and made them sparkle. The first lesson is simple. You must never stop saying what is in your heart. He cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing away the faint traces of old tears. Then I will start now. I love you, Rosalind. I love you with everything I have, everything I am, and everything I will become. You are my heart. You are my home." She leaned into his touch, her own hands covering his. "And I love you, Julian. I never truly stopped. I just needed to know I was safe." He kissed her then, softly, reverently, under the fading light. It was not a kiss of passion so much as a kiss of promise, a vow sealed without words. When they finally drew apart, Lily's cheerful voice rang out from the nursery window above, demanding they come see the picture she had drawn. Laughing, they climbed the stairs hand in hand, ready to begin the rest of their lives. Months later, when the first snow of winter blanketed the estate, Ashbourne Hall held a small private celebration. Lily had just turned 8, and Rose had news of her own to share. She waited until the candles were lit, and Julian was seated beside her on the sofa before she took his hand and pressed it gently against the soft swell of her belly. His eyes widened. "Truly." "Truly," she whispered, her smile tremulous with joy. "A new beginning." Julian bowed his head, overcome. When he looked up, his eyes were damp, but his smile was radiant. He pulled her into an embrace so gentle it felt like being wrapped in sunlight. Lily, perched on the rug with her picture book, tilted her head and asked if she would have a brother or a sister. "We shall be happy either way," Rose said, and Julian nodded, kissing her temple. The fire crackled. Outside, the snow fell softly, hushing the world in white. Inside, there was only warmth, only love, only the quiet, unshakable peace of a family that had been forged through pain and redeemed by grace. And Rosalind Devereux, once a forgotten duchess, knew she would never feel invisible again.